Is another video on why I believe in God, specifically the God of the Bible. So as I do more work in understanding mathematics, I understand that math is a language. Just like any other language, it has its grammars, its syntax, its words, and those words mean different things. But what the words relate to is real. Just like in language, what you speak, it relates to something real. That's how we communicate. And in the order of what is real and what the mathematical language communicates, it proves there's a design in the inherent fabric of nature that we can describe it. So this gets into the second point, is language, that we have an ability to understand and create names for objects, and obviously that name is not what the object is. The name is merely how we refer to it. So a dandelion will have a word in English and a word in Chinese, and the words will be different, and you don't know if the Chinese might have the same word for another type of flower, but the dandelion will have its own word in both languages. And the English will have a specific word for every single type of flower and animal. And just like in science, we have a Latin name for all the different animals and plants and stuff. And it relates to something real, okay? And these categorizations are how we understand things. Because the third point is that there's form. There's categorizations that allow us to have understanding, and these categorizations are the foundation of logic. They're the foundation of reason. We can't understand something without comparing it to something else. Okay, now, and these comparisons draw true conclusions. This is why they say tautology is wrong form in logic, although I'd say everything has its basis to be either true or false, so therefore everything has to be related to a tautology. At some point, there needs to be something that's true before you can have any form of logic. But the fact is that there is truth, there is an orderer, there is a provider, there is something that's not us. As Descartes said, I can be wrong, so therefore there has to be something higher than us that establishes what's truth. And these things can change very discreetly. Our perceptions of them can change. Our words can translate into different languages and be different. Our versions of the Bible can be different from one another, but the fact is the context, the overreaching themes, the overreaching point that makes it all make sense is there. And that is how language works, is through that. And that proves God. Okay, another thing is the archaeology. There is a lot of archaeology. I mean, you could literally write encyclopedias on it, both New and Old Testament. I've seen thousands of different pieces of archaeological evidence, and it just makes sense. You read what's written on the artifacts, you look at the pictures, you look at the puzzle, you put it together, it becomes clear that the Bible is true. Now, some of these artifacts get destroyed by ill-intended ne'er-do-wells because people don't want the Bible to be true. I've seen entire beaches renamed. I've seen and the most important discoveries ignored by everyone. I've seen people throw stones that should have proven that an event was true, and they broke it. Okay? I've seen people scratch out words on ancient manuscripts before. So the fact of the matter is that I've seen enough evidence to conclude that the Bible's true. The Bible is a historical document, and I've also read the prophecies, and they do, in a sense, clearly convey that Jesus is the Messiah. Now, either Jesus was trying to fulfill these prophecies, or he was the Messiah, but the fact of the matter is, in very plain and simple language, the prophecies predict Jesus. And I believe no man can humanly accomplish hundreds of messianic prophecies without having divine providence cause him to do it, because it's just impossible for a man to fulfill hundreds of messianic prophecies, maybe even thousands. Some of them are just not even on our radar, but they're in there. I can think of about half a dozen. And another thing is that the Bible is witness. We know this through archaeology, but we also know this through the succession of the apostolic fathers who wrote, and they knew apostles such as Papias or Clement or Ignatius or Polycarp. They knew these people. And then we have the accounts from the apostolic fathers of who wrote the Bible, such as we have the Epistle of Barnabas. We have the Papias fragments, who Papias knew St. John, and St. John knew Matthew and Peter, and that's how we know that the Gospels were written by witnesses, is that Papias dictated the book of John from John. This is a first-hand account of this fact, and we have independent corroboration such as Hebrew Gospels of Matthew in India that are found by the Portuguese and the 2nd century church, and we have also Hebrew grammatic structures in the book of Matthew with its lack of punctuation, showing it was probably written in Aramaic first. We have Mark. It is written out of order. It's in the canonical order, but it's written out of order of the other Gospels, which means it wasn't copied word from word. The fact of the matter is, I think when Christ said Peter is the rock of the church, that meant he had an influence on all 3 of the synoptic Gospels. That his ideas, his memory, he kept all the actions of Jesus in his memory, and he recalled them, and then other apostles, such as maybe Jude or Andrew or Bartholomew, or even some of the ones that were in the group of 70 that Jesus sent out, they corroborated the actions, and they all corroborated together, and they built this narrative over 4 Gospels. We know Paul knew Luke, and Luke knew Paul, and Paul knew James, Peter, John, and Mary. And we also know that Luke went to the Tabularum because there's similarities between the book of Luke, what it documents about Jesus, and other ancient writings like Josephus. He drew it from a similar source, or actually Tacitus. They drew it from a similar source, and that shows that Luke went down to the Tabularum and found Jesus' records. So, the Gospels are witness, and if the Gospels are witness, then it means that Jesus is the Lord. Because Jesus did fulfill these 300, 400 messianic prophecies. Jesus did raise from the dead. Jesus did raise from the dead because we have account of all the apostles, their deaths. We have church traditions that keep account of this, and not really Eusebius. He did a very bad job. But we have people like Thielen Van Bracht, who kept a very meticulous record of all the martyrs of the faith, and he has an account of every martyr, and he has them sourced, which those sources don't exist anymore, unfortunately. That's kind of what I'm talking about, is there's a lot of important documents being destroyed in order to, in a sense, hide Christianity from the public, because it is true, and of course Satan is very actively trying to control access to this information because he has it out for you and me. He wants to destroy us. And then, of course, another reason why I believe is the philosophical premise of good. That there is good and there is evil. I see both of these things, and I believe. Because Nietzsche quite adamantly says there cannot be good and evil without a God. And I plainly see good and evil, and so I say there must be a God. It's a simple argument. It's like, if there's good, then there's a God. Nietzsche says there is no God, so there is no good. So therefore, I see good, so therefore I reason that there is a God. And it's a simple argument, and that's what atheists have said, and they're adamant about it, and you can't get away from that fact because every atheist has to admit it. They can't. And I think it just collapses all value structures. It collapses all meaning, which is another reason is the existential argument, is that all meaning collapses without God. Even Descartes' famous statement, I was watching Unsolicited Advice, even Descartes' famous statement, I think therefore I am, gets doubted by atheists as not a very strong statement. Without God's existence, you can't even found that statement. It's just how important God is for the very fabric of meaning and the very fabric of self and the very fabric of existence. It's just important to understand this. And this is what the best atheist philosophers are saying. I did not say this. If I was an atheist, I'd try my best to debunk that. But the problem is atheists have tried and they couldn't. And this is what led to the philosophers of the existentialists, the modernists, the communists, the nihilists. It's what led to these ideas, is that it's unavoidable. It's an unavoidable consequence of atheism. And I think the fact is that we can go back a step and see, well, there is meaning and there is good. It's not based on what we say. It's something intrinsic. And if you're being honest, you can see beauty and you can see truth and you can see good. If you're being honest with yourself, that's why there's very strong reason to believe in God, is that without it, there's really no reason, but you can see these things, so that's how you conclude there is a God. So my reason for believing in the God of the Bible is that it has the best ethical arguments. both New and Old Testament. So to get into why the Old Testament has some very cringy laws is because it's punishment for all sin. All sin gets punished. Every nation, every person, anybody who sins gets destroyed by the law. And that's what the prophets are, is the curses, and that's what Deuteronomy is the curses of not following that law. Because sin causes suffering, so therefore there has to be a way that God brings people into account for the suffering they cause. And that's what the curse is destroying people for the sin and suffering that they've caused. Now Christ is the redemption from that curse. So you read the New Testament, which is really the most important. It removes that law and its duties from us and allows us to live by conscience rather than by strict letter of the law. We get to, in a sense, live free and do what's good for the sake of good, because Christ redeems us from the law. And that's what Christ did. Now you always see there's two parts of every epistle that Paul writes. There's how we're saved and what we do when we're saved. And I think that's the strongest argument for the gospel, is that it is the best ethical framework in history. I've studied all the sages, I've studied all the philosophers. I gotta say, there's only one that I would trust who is all of it and none of the chaff that the other philosophers do, and that's Jesus. And that's why I believe in Jesus generally, is because he solves the, well, I messed up, so what do I do now? And he also solves, well, what do I got to do to be a good person? He solves both those problems. And that's why I believe in him. That's generally my reason for believing in God.